Jonathan Morgan never cared much for that little rundown house on the edge of Boston. He inherited it as part of a messy property portfolio when he bought out a bankrupt real estate firm. To him, it was just another transaction, numbers on a screen, papers to sign. His team warned him that someone was still squatting inside without paying rent, and the court had already approved the eviction. Instead of sending security, he decided to handle it personally. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe boredom, or maybe he wanted to look the woman in the eyes as he reclaimed what was his. The November wind bit through his cashmere coat as he pulled up to the address in his Mercedes. The house looked worse up close than it had in the photos. Cracked windows, a broken gate, and peeling paint that revealed decades of neglect. The lawn had surrendered to weeds long ago. Jonathan checked his watch. He had a meeting downtown in 2 hours. This wouldn't take long. The house sat in a neighborhood that time, and the city had forgotten. Once a working-class haven, now just a collection of fading dreams and mounting bills. Jonathan had grown up comfortable in Cambridge, his father a professor, his mother a gallery owner. Poverty was something he understood academically, but had never touched. As he approached the porch, he noticed children playing in the street, their laughter at odds with their surroundings. He knocked firmly. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Jonathan tried the handle and found the door unlocked. The living room was dark, filled with worn furniture and the faint smell of mildew. A small TV sat on a milk crate in the corner. Books were stacked neatly on the floor, mostly children's stories and medical texts. Strange combination, he thought. "Hello," he called out, expecting a confrontation, maybe even screams or begging. But instead, he heard coughing. Then footsteps. Small, cautious ones. That's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, standing in the doorway of what used to be the dining room. Her clothes were too thin for the weather, her face pale, eyes alert but not afraid. Her dark hair was neatly braided, though several strands had escaped. Behind her, Jonathan could barely see the outline of a woman lying on a mattress on the floor, covered in sweat and blankets. The girl said nothing. She just looked at him and stepped protectively in front of her mother. Jonathan felt something unfamiliar, hesitation. He'd done hundreds of evictions through his company. They were just business decisions, necessary steps to protect investments. He'd never thought about the faces behind the paperwork. "Are you the landlord?" the girl finally asked, her voice small but steady. "I'm the owner," Jonathan replied, suddenly uncomfortable with the distinction. The eviction papers felt heavy in his hand. He'd practiced what he would say on the drive over. The rehearsed speech about trespassing and legal consequences now stuck in his throat. From the mattress, the woman tried to sit up but fell back, overtaken by another coughing fit. Jonathan stepped forward instinctively, but the girl raised her hand. "Mom needs rest," she said simply. Jonathan looked around the room again. A bucket caught drips from a leaking ceiling. The windows were sealed with plastic to keep out drafts. Despite the squalor, there was an attempt at order. Someone had swept the floors, arranged the sparse belongings with care. This wasn't just squatting, this was survival. "How long have you been here?" he asked, his voice softer now. The girl studied him, deciding whether he deserved an answer. "Since spring," she finally said. "After they took our apartment." 6 months, then. Boston had seen one of its harshest summers, followed by an early autumn chill. Jonathan thought about the property records. The previous owner had abandoned this place over a year ago, leaving it to the bank, who sold it to the company Jonathan had acquired. The house had been empty on paper, but full of life in reality. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. The girl didn't flinch. She was used to the neighborhood's soundtrack. Jonathan, however, felt increasingly out of place in his tailored suit and Italian shoes. He looked down at the eviction notice again. His signature was at the bottom, authorizing the removal of any occupants within 48 hours. He hadn't even bothered to learn their names before signing it. The woman on the mattress opened her eyes, fever-bright and unfocused. She looked directly at Jonathan, but seemed to see someone else. "Is it time?" she whispered to her daughter. "Do we have to go?" The girl turned to her mother, her face softening. "Not yet, Mom. Just rest." But they both knew the truth. Jonathan knew it too. The system was designed to protect property, not people. Tomorrow, officers would come with or without him. The furniture would be placed on the curb. The locks would be changed. And this child and her sick mother would join the invisible ranks of Boston's homeless. Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant reminding him about his meeting. He silenced it without looking. For the first time in years, he felt something crack inside him. He was a man who made decisions without looking back. Ruthless efficiency had built his empire. But standing there, watching this little girl try to be a nurse, a caretaker, and a daughter all at once, he couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He couldn't follow through. The eviction notice hung limply in his hand. The girl watched him, her eyes too old for her young face. In that moment, Jonathan realized he had a choice to make. And for once in his life, the spreadsheets and profit margins weren't making it for him. Jonathan stood there, frozen, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he suddenly didn't know what he had come to do. The eviction papers were still in his hand, but they now felt like weapons. The girl hadn't said a word since her initial questions, yet he felt completely disarmed. She walked to a corner of the room, took a wet cloth from a bucket, and gently placed it on her mother's forehead. Her movements were precise, practiced. She had done this before, maybe too many times. "What's your name?" Jonathan finally asked. No answer. The girl wrung out another cloth, her small hands red from the cold water. "What happened to your mother?" Still nothing. Only then did Jonathan notice the plastic grocery bags by the wall. Empty. There was no food, no medicine in sight. A frayed blanket had been tucked around her mother's trembling body. As if it could fight off the fever he could feel radiating from across the room. The girl glanced at him again, this time pleading without begging. Her dignity was intact, though everything else around her was crumbling. Jonathan set the eviction papers on a rickety table and knelt down to the girl's level. "I want to help," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl studied him, her brown eyes calculating rather than fearful. "Emma," she finally said. "My mom is Caroline." "Emma," Jonathan repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "How long has your mom been sick?" Emma turned back to her mother, adjusting the cloth that had slipped from her forehead. 3 days this time. But she gets better. She always gets better. This time. The words hung in the air between them. Jonathan glanced around the room again, noticing details he'd missed before. A pile of library books, school papers carefully stacked and paper-clipped together. A child's drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a house that looked nothing like this one. A house with flowers and sunshine, the kind of house every child should live in. "Do you go to school, Emma?" he asked. "When Mom can get up," she replied. "I'm in 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. Mrs. Peterson is my teacher." Jonathan nodded, recognizing the school name. It was about a mile away, a long walk for a child, especially in Boston's winter. "And when your mom can't get up, what happens then?" Emma's face closed like a shutter. She busied herself with rearranging the meager bedding. "I take care of her. I can read her the assignments when I get back." Caroline stirred on the mattress, her eyes fluttering open. They were the same rich brown as her daughter's, but clouded with fever. "Emma," she called weakly. "Who's here?" Emma moved to her mother's side instantly. "It's okay, Mom. Just a visitor." Caroline struggled to focus on Jonathan. Recognition slowly dawned in her eyes, followed by fear. "You're from the bank," she whispered. "Please, just a few more days. I get paid on Friday." Jonathan felt a knot form in his stomach. She didn't understand. There was no rent to pay, no lease to honor. The house wasn't even legally available for occupation. But looking at Caroline's desperate face, he couldn't bring himself to explain the complexity of property law and corporate acquisitions. "Don't worry about that right now," he said instead. "You need a doctor." Caroline shook her head, setting off another round of coughing. When she could speak again, her voice was barely audible. "No insurance. No money for the ER." Emma looked at Jonathan, a silent question in her eyes. Would he help or would he judge? Would he be like the others who made promises they didn't keep? Outside, the early winter darkness was falling. Streetlights flickered on, casting shadows through the cracked windows. In his other life, his real life, Jonathan would be heading to his downtown meeting now, discussing profit margins over expensive whiskey. His assistant would have already called a car service. His evening would proceed with the clockwork precision he demanded from his world. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed. "Dr. Martinez? It's Jonathan Morgan. I need a favor." Emma watched him suspiciously as he spoke, explaining the situation in clipped, urgent tones. When he hung up, she asked, "Who was that?" "My friend. He's a doctor who makes house calls. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Emma's expression didn't change, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. She returned to her mother's side, whispering something Jonathan couldn't hear. Caroline nodded weakly, her eyes never leaving Jonathan. While they waited, Jonathan explored the tiny house. The kitchen had a hot plate, but no working stove. The refrigerator hummed loudly but contained only condiment packets and a half-gallon of milk. The bathroom sink was cracked, the shower curtain mended with duct tape. Yet someone, Emma, he assumed, had scrubbed everything clean. There were no bugs, no rodent droppings. Just poverty, worn like a heavy coat they couldn't remove. Dr. Martinez arrived with a black bag and a kind smile. He examined Caroline efficiently, his face giving nothing away. Emma never left her mother's side, watching every movement, absorbing every term. Jonathan stood in the doorway, an intruder in a moment he had created. When the examination was complete, Dr. Martinez pulled Jonathan into the hallway. Pneumonia, he said quietly. Early stages, but she needs antibiotics, proper nutrition, and rest. Real rest, not this. He gestured to the mattress on the floor. Can you treat her here? Jonathan asked. Martinez shook his head. She needs monitoring for at least 48 hours. The cough could worsen, her oxygen levels could drop. She should be in a hospital. Jonathan nodded. Decision made. Arrange it. Use my insurance information if you need to. Martinez raised an eyebrow but didn't question further. He'd known Jonathan long enough to recognize the tone. When he returned to the main room to break the news, Emma stood up straight, her chin tilted defiantly. We can't go to the hospital, she said firmly. They'll call social services. They'll take me away. Jonathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty house. Of course that was her fear. A sick mother, no visible means of support, squatting in an abandoned property. The system would separate them faster than Emma could pack her few belongings. He knelt down again, meeting Emma's eyes directly. I won't let that happen, he promised. Your mom needs help that she can't get here. But I give you my word, you two will stay together. Emma stared at him, searching for the lie she expected to find. Jonathan held her gaze, allowing her to see whatever truth she needed. Finally, she nodded once, a child making an adult decision. As the ambulance arrived, lights flashing but sirens silent per Jonathan's request, Emma gathered their few precious items, the drawing, a worn teddy bear, a photo in a plastic frame. She worked quickly, methodically, like someone who had packed to leave in a hurry before. Jonathan watched her, wondering how many times this child had been forced to start over. And as they climbed into his car to follow the ambulance, he wondered why. For the first time, he cared. The hospital waiting room was unnaturally bright after the dimness of the house. Emma sat rigidly in a chair designed for adults, her feet dangling inches from the floor. Her backpack, containing everything she deemed essential enough to bring, rested on her lap like a shield. Jonathan sat beside her, painfully aware of the space between them. The social chasm was wider than the physical inches. Are you hungry? He asked after 20 minutes of silence. Emma shook her head, then reconsidered. Maybe a little. Jonathan pointed to the cafeteria visible through glass doors. They have sandwiches, soup, probably some cookies too. Emma glanced toward the double doors where they'd taken her mother, then back at Jonathan. The calculation was clear on her face. Could she trust this stranger to still be here if she left? Would her mother be alone? I'll wait right here, Jonathan promised, understanding her unspoken fear. Your mom is in good hands. It'll be a while before we can see her. Emma slid off the chair, her decision made. I'll be right back, she said, a warning rather than information. Jonathan watched her walk away, straight-backed and serious. An old soul, his grandmother would have called her. He checked his phone, 27 missed calls, 43 emails. The business world was imploding without him. For the first time in his career, Jonathan couldn't bring himself to care. Emma returned with a tray bearing 2 sandwiches, 2 cartons of milk, and a chocolate chip cookie carefully broken into equal halves. She set it on the chair between them. I got you one too, she said. The lady said it was okay to use your card. Jonathan blinked, then remembered he'd handed Emma his credit card without thinking. A $2,000 limit black card in the hands of an 8-year-old. She'd bought the cheapest sandwiches on the menu and split a single cookie. Thank you, he said, accepting the offering for what it was, a peace treaty, tentatively extended. They ate in silence. Jonathan noticed Emma wrapping half her sandwich in a napkin and slipping it into her backpack, saving it for later. For her mother, perhaps. The habit of someone who couldn't count on the next meal. A nurse appeared with clipboard in hand. Family of Caroline Taylor? Emma jumped up. That's my mom. The nurse looked at Jonathan questioningly. He stood, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. We're together, he said simply. In the small consultation room, Dr. Winters explained Caroline's condition. Pneumonia, as Dr. Martinez had diagnosed, complicated by exhaustion and malnutrition. She'd need to stay for observation, perhaps 3 days. Emma listened intently, asking surprisingly sophisticated questions about medication dosages and side effects. You know a lot about medicine for someone your age, Dr. Winters remarked. Emma shrugged. Mom was studying to be a nurse before. She trailed off, glancing at Jonathan. Before what? He prompted gently. Emma twisted the straps of her backpack. For the first time, she looked like the child she was. Before everything went wrong. When they were finally allowed to see Caroline, she was sleeping, and 4 in her arm and an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger. Emma approached the bed cautiously, relaxing only when she confirmed her mother was breathing steadily. She pulled a chair close to the bed and took out a dog-eared paperback. I always read to her when she's sick, Emma explained, not looking up. She says it helps her remember that things get better. Jonathan nodded, though Emma wasn't watching. He stepped into the hallway to give them privacy, but left the door ajar. Through the crack, he could hear Emma's clear voice reading about a magical wardrobe and a winter that lasted too long. The night nurse found him there an hour later, still standing sentry. Sir, visiting hours are over. Only immediate family can stay. Jonathan straightened his tie, summoning the authority that usually came so naturally. I'm Emma's guardian while her mother is ill, he said, the lie coming easily. She'll be staying with me, but I'd like her to have a few more minutes. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Just until 9, then. Hospital policy. When Jonathan returned to the room, Emma had fallen asleep, her head resting on the edge of her mother's bed, the book still open in her lap. Caroline was awake, stroking her daughter's hair with a weak hand. She looked up when Jonathan entered, recognition and wariness in her eyes. You're the man who owns the house, she said softly. Jonathan nodded, taking the chair on the opposite side of the bed. Jonathan Morgan, why are you helping us? No preamble, no gratitude yet, just the direct question of someone who'd learned to distrust kindness that came without explanation. Jonathan considered several answers, discarding each as too simple or too complex. Finally, he settled on honesty. I don't know yet. Caroline accepted this with a slow nod. We've been in the house since April. I know we shouldn't be there. We just had nowhere else to go. What happened? Jonathan asked, echoing his earlier question to Emma. Caroline's eyes drifted to her sleeping daughter. Everything all at once. I was in nursing school, working nights at a care facility. Emma's father left when I got pregnant, so it was always just us. We were making it work until I got sick the first time. She paused, coughing weakly. Pneumonia, like now? I missed 3 weeks of work. Lost my job. Fell behind on rent. The landlord wouldn't wait. Jonathan had heard variations of this story before, in news articles, in charity appeals, in political speeches. It had always seemed distant, academic. Now it had Emma's face attached to it. We stayed with friends until we couldn't. Shelters were full. The house was empty. I told Emma it was temporary, just until I found another job. Caroline's voice broke. That was 7 months ago. What about family? Jonathan asked. My parents died when I was in high school. Car accident. Emma's father's family wants nothing to do with us. Caroline looked away. Pride kept me from begging the few friends I had left. Eventually, I ran out of options. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Caroline immediately quieted, her focus returning to her daughter with practiced vigilance. She's missed so much school, Caroline whispered. She's so smart, Mr. Morgan. She deserves better than this. Call me Jonathan, he said. And yes, I can see that she's exceptional. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I've failed her. A mother is supposed to provide, to protect. Look at us. She's taking care of me more than I'm taking care of her. Jonathan thought about the little girl who'd faced him down in the doorway, who'd tended her mother with such determination, who'd divided a cookie exactly in half. You've raised a remarkable daughter, he said. That's not failure. The room fell silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Caroline's eyelids grew heavy as the medication took effect. Jonathan stood to leave, but her voice stopped him. "We'll be gone when I'm better," she murmured. "You won't have to evict us. I promise." Jonathan paused at the door, looking back at mother and daughter. Emma's small hand had found her mother's even in sleep, their fingers intertwined. He thought about the empty house, the eviction notice still sitting on that rickety table. He thought about his penthouse apartment, designed by an expensive decorator, featured in Boston Magazine, and utterly devoid of such simple human connection. "We'll figure something out," he said quietly, though Caroline was already asleep and couldn't hear his promise. In the hospital corridor, Jonathan finally checked his messages. His assistant had rescheduled his meetings. His business partner was furious. His date for the evening had given up waiting. His world was continuing without him, slightly inconvenienced but essentially unchanged. Meanwhile, in that room behind him, a little girl was holding her mother's hand, both of them balancing on the edge of disaster. A disaster he had nearly caused. A disaster he now, inexplicably, wanted to prevent. Jonathan walked to the elevator, his decision forming with each step. By the time he reached his car, he knew exactly what he needed to do next. It would upend his schedule, aggravate his partners, and possibly cost him money. For the first time in his adult life, Jonathan Morgan found himself thinking, so what? Morning came with a clarity Jonathan hadn't felt in years. He made breakfast while Emma slept, scrambled eggs and toast, the limit of his culinary skills. His penthouse felt different with a child in it. Emptier somehow, despite the additional occupant. He realized he designed his life to impress others, but had never considered what might actually bring him joy. Morning came with a clarity Jonathan hadn't felt in years. He made breakfast while Emma slept, scrambled eggs and toast, the limit of his culinary skills. His penthouse felt different with a child in it. Emptier somehow, despite the additional occupant. He realized he designed his life to impress others, but had never considered what might actually bring him joy. Emma emerged from the guest room wearing the same clothes as yesterday, her hair neatly rebraided. She'd washed her face and folded the blankets on the sofa. Always tidy, always careful not to impose. "Good morning," Jonathan said, trying to sound casual, as if he regularly had breakfast with 8-year-olds. "Sleep okay?" Emma nodded, eyeing the food warily. "When can we see my mom?" "Visiting hours start at 10. We have time to eat, and maybe find you some new clothes first." Emma looked down at her worn sweater. "These are fine. You'll be more comfortable with a few more options," Jonathan insisted gently. "And your mom would probably like some things too when she's ready to leave the hospital." Emma considered this, then nodded practically. "That makes sense." They ate in silence, Emma taking small, deliberate bites. Jonathan watched her covertly, noticing how she saved the last piece of toast, wrapping it in a napkin, always preparing for scarcity. "There's plenty more," he said. "You don't have to save it." Emma's cheeks flushed. "Habit," she mumbled. After breakfast, Jonathan called his assistant, Diane, and explained the situation, or a version of it. Emma needed clothes. Caroline needed essentials for a hospital stay. Could Diane handle it? "Of course," she said, her tone neutral but curious. "Will you be in the office today?" Jonathan looked at Emma, who was standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at Boston Harbor. "No," he said. "I'm taking a few personal days." The shopping arrived via courier before they left for the hospital. Jeans, sweaters, warm pajamas, a winter coat with matching hat and gloves. Toiletries, slippers, and a soft robe for Caroline. Everything practical, good quality, but not ostentatious. Diane knew him well enough to understand that wasn't what this situation called for. Emma accepted the clothes with quiet thanks, changing quickly. When she emerged in jeans that actually fit and a red sweater that brought color to her pale cheeks, she looked more like a typical third grader. Only her eyes, watchful, wary, betrayed her unusual maturity. At the hospital, Caroline was sitting up, the oxygen tube removed. Her fever had broken overnight. She smiled when she saw Emma, opening her arms for a hug that her daughter rushed into. Jonathan hung back, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a private moment. "Mr. Morgan," Caroline acknowledged him over Emma's head. "Thank you for looking after Emma." Jonathan waved away her thanks. She was no trouble. "And please, it's Jonathan." Emma pulled back from her mother, examining her face carefully. "You look better." "I feel better," Caroline confirmed. The doctor says I can probably go home tomorrow if my lungs sound clear. Home. The word hung awkwardly in the air. Jonathan cleared his throat. About that, I'd like to make a suggestion. Caroline tensed visibly. Emma moved closer to her mother, protective as always. I own a small apartment building in Dorchester, Jonathan explained. There's a vacant one-bedroom on the second floor. It's not fancy, but it's clean, warm, and legally available. I'd like to offer it to you. Caroline's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. We can't afford market rent. We can discuss that later, Jonathan said, deliberately vague. The important thing is getting you both into proper housing. Emma needs stability. Caroline looked at her daughter, who was watching the exchange with cautious hope. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. It was a fair question, one Jonathan had been asking himself all night. His answer surprised even him with its honesty. Because I almost did something unforgivable without even realizing it. Because your daughter made me see people instead of property for the first time in my career. Because maybe I need this as much as you do. Emma tugged at her mother's hospital gown. Mom, we could have a real kitchen. Maybe I could go to school every day. The simple dreams of a child who'd been denied basics pierced Jonathan more deeply than any business negotiation ever had. Caroline must have felt it too, because her eyes filled with tears. We'll pay you back, she insisted. When I'm well enough to work, I'll make this right. Jonathan nodded, accepting her need for dignity. Of course. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Winters, who arrived with Caroline's chart and a concerned expression. Mrs. Taylor, your blood work shows some irregularities we need to address. Your immune system is quite compromised. What does that mean? Emma asked immediately. Dr. Winters glanced at Jonathan, clearly weighing what to say in front of the child. Caroline nodded permission. It means your mom's body has been working very hard for a long time without proper nutrition or rest. She'll need medication, a special diet, and regular checkups to get strong again. But she'll get better, right? Emma pressed. With proper care, absolutely, Dr. Winters assured her. But it will take time. After the doctor left, Caroline closed her eyes briefly. I don't have health insurance, she admitted softly. I haven't had it since I lost my job. Jonathan, who had been thinking about this very issue since last night, pulled a chair closer to the bed. I have a friend at Mass Health. She can help you navigate the emergency enrollment process. In the meantime, don't worry about the hospital bill. Caroline started to protest, but Jonathan held up a hand. Please, let me do this. The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet conversations in hospital corridors. Jonathan activated connections he'd never used for anything but business advantage. By evening, Caroline had temporary health coverage, a social worker assigned to help with her case, and a discharge plan for the following day. Emma stayed by her mother's side, watchful but more relaxed than yesterday. When Caroline napped, the girl took out her school books, working diligently on math problems. Jonathan observed her from across the room, impressed by her focus. You like school, he commented. Emma nodded without looking up. Mom says education is the one thing nobody can take away from you. Such wisdom, passed from one generation fighting for stability to the next. Jonathan thought about his own privileged education, private schools, Harvard Business School, and how he'd taken it all for granted. As visiting hours ended, Emma reluctantly prepared to leave with Jonathan again. Caroline pulled her close, whispering something in her ear that made the girl nod solemnly. In the elevator, Emma was quiet until they reached the lobby. Then she looked up at Jonathan with those two old eyes. My mom says we should trust you. She says good people still exist in the world. Jonathan felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders. I'll try to prove her right. That night, back in his penthouse, Jonathan made another set of calls, this time to his business partner, Marcus, and his lawyer, Sarah. They were confused, then concerned, then outright alarmed as he outlined what he wanted to do. By midnight, he had convinced them, though neither fully understood his sudden change of heart. Jonathan himself didn't fully understand it. He only knew that when he finally slept, for the first time in years, he felt no anxiety about tomorrow's meetings or stock prices. Instead, he dreamed of a little girl reading to her mother, holding the world together through sheer force of will. Caroline stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. Her pneumonia was stubborn, complicated by years of poor nutrition and inadequate rest. Each morning, Jonathan would bring Emma to visit, watching from the sidelines as the little girl dutifully read from library books, arranged her mother's pillows, and reported on the apartment preparations with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had a stable home. On the fourth day, Dr. Winters finally signed the discharge papers. "Remember, Mrs. Taylor, you need rest. Real rest. No work for at least 3 weeks, and then only part-time for a while." Caroline nodded, though the worry lines around her eyes deepened. Jonathan saw the silent calculation: 3 weeks without income, 3 weeks of dependency. He deliberately busied himself with the wheelchair while Emma helped her mother change into the new clothes Diane had sent. The Dorchester apartment was modest by Jonathan's standards, but felt luxurious to Caroline and Emma. 2 rooms, a functional kitchen, windows that sealed properly, and a bathroom with consistent hot water. Jonathan had arranged for basic furnishings: a bed for Caroline, a pull-out sofa for Emma, a small dining table, and essential kitchenware. Diane had added thoughtful touches: plants on the windowsills, soft throw blankets, and a shelf of books she thought Emma might enjoy. "It's perfect," Emma whispered as she explored, running her fingers over smooth countertops and light switches that actually worked. Caroline moved more slowly, taking in each detail with disbelief. When she reached the small desk in the corner, set up with a laptop and school supplies, she turned to Jonathan with questions in her eyes. "Emma mentioned you were studying nursing," he explained. "I thought you might want to continue your coursework when you're stronger." Caroline pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll get better," Jonathan replied simply. "Say you'll let me help until you can stand on your own." That first week fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Jonathan would arrive each morning with groceries, check on Caroline's recovery, and then drive Emma to school, an arrangement he'd negotiated with the principal of Lincoln Elementary, who'd been sympathetic once she understood the situation. In the afternoons, his assistant would pick Emma up and bring her to the apartment, where a home health aide monitored Caroline's recovery. Jonathan found himself scheduling business calls around school drop-offs, rearranging meetings to accommodate doctor's appointments. His partners were baffled, his clients impatient. But for the first time in his career, Jonathan was measuring success by something other than profit margins. On Friday afternoon, Jonathan arrived at the apartment to find Marcus waiting in the lobby, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. "This is where you've been disappearing to?" Marcus asked, eyeing the modest building. "John, what's going on? You've missed 3 board meetings. The Seaport development is stalling without your input. And now I hear you've pulled the Harrison Street property off the market." Jonathan sighed. He'd known this conversation was coming. "Let's grab coffee. There's a decent place around the corner." Over espresso at a neighborhood cafe, Jonathan explained about Caroline and Emma, about the eviction he couldn't bring himself to execute, about the child who'd made him question everything he'd built his life around. Marcus listened with growing disbelief. "Let me get this straight. You're appending your entire business because of one sob story? Do you know how many people get evicted in Boston every day? You can't save them all, John." "I'm not trying to save them all," Jonathan replied. "Just these 2. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, I get it. You feel guilty. So write a check to a shelter, serve on a nonprofit board. Don't throw away everything we've built." "That's just it," Jonathan said, realizing the truth as he spoke it. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally building something that matters." The conversation ended in a stalemate. Marcus left unconvinced, warning that the board wouldn't wait forever. Jonathan returned to the apartment, where Emma greeted him with a drawing she'd made at school. 3 stick figures standing in front of a building that looked suspiciously like their apartment. "That's Mom, that's me, and that's you," she explained, pointing to each figure. The Jonathan figure was disproportionately tall, wearing what appeared to be a tie. Jonathan stared at the picture, something shifting inside him. He'd never been included in someone else's conception of family before. Never been the third figure in a child's drawing. The simplicity of it, her acceptance of his place in their lives, moved him in ways he couldn't articulate. Caroline watched from the doorway, her color better, but her body still thin and fragile. "Emma, why don't you get started on your homework? I need to talk to Mr. Morgan." Once Emma was settled at the small table, Caroline led Jonathan to the apartment's tiny balcony. The December air was crisp, the sky already darkening at 4 in the afternoon. She wrapped her cardigan tightly around herself. I need to know what this is, she said without preamble. What you want from us? Jonathan blinked, taken aback. I don't want anything. Everyone wants something, Mr. Morgan. Jonathan, he corrected automatically. Jonathan, she amended. You're a successful businessman. You don't do charity without reason. So tell me what this costs, because Emma is getting attached, and I need to know if we should be preparing for disappointment. Her directness was refreshing after weeks of corporate doublespeak. Jonathan leaned against the railing, choosing his words carefully. Do you know what I was doing when I came to that house? He asked. I was personally serving an eviction notice. Me, not my employees. I wanted to look you in the eye when I took your home away. Caroline stiffened but said nothing. Instead, I found Emma, and she looked at me not with fear or anger, but with this dignity, this unshakable determination to protect you. And I realized I'd never cared about anything the way she cares about you. The wind picked up, rustling dead leaves in the courtyard below. Caroline waited, sensing he wasn't finished. I own half of Boston, at least on paper, Jonathan continued. I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. I have a penthouse overlooking the harbor and a summer house in the vineyard. And none of it has ever made me feel the way I felt when Emma brought me that sandwich in the hospital and broke a cookie in half to share. Caroline's expression softened slightly, but her practical nature remained cautious. So we're what? Your redemption project? Jonathan shook his head. You're my wake-up call. I was sleepwalking through my life until I met you both. Inside, they could see Emma working at the table, her brow furrowed in concentration over a math worksheet. The sight centered them both, a reminder of what was truly at stake. I can't pay market rent, Caroline finally said. Not for a long time, maybe never in this neighborhood. I know, and I won't be your charity case forever. I need to stand on my own. I know that too. Caroline studied him, weighing his sincerity against her lifetime of learned skepticism. I was a good nurse before. I could be again. I believe you. She nodded, decision made. 6 months. That's how long I'll accept help. Enough time to recover, finish my certification, and find a job. After that, we pay our own way, even if it means moving somewhere cheaper. Jonathan wanted to argue, to tell her 6 months wasn't enough, that Boston's rental market was impossible, that her health might take longer to recover. But he recognized the pride beneath her declaration, the same pride that had kept her fighting for Emma through homelessness and illness. Agreed, he said, extending his hand. 6 months. They shook on it, equals despite everything that separated them. That evening, after Caroline had gone to bed, exhausted by even this brief negotiation, Emma sat beside Jonathan on the sofa. She was supposed to be reading, but instead watched him answering emails on his phone. Are you very rich? She asked suddenly. Jonathan set his phone down, surprised by the question. By most standards, yes. Emma considered this. Then why do you look sad sometimes? Children's perception could be unervingly accurate. Jonathan searched for an answer she might understand. Having money doesn't always make people happy. Sometimes it just gives them more things to worry about. My mom says money doesn't buy happiness, but it buys security, which is almost the same thing. Jonathan smiled at Caroline's practical wisdom, passed down to her equally practical daughter. Your mom is very smart. Emma nodded solemnly. She was going to be a nurse before I was born. Then she had to work different jobs to take care of me instead. The casual revelation of Caroline's sacrificed dreams hit Jonathan harder than any business setback ever had. And now she can try again, Emma said with simple faith. Because of you. Jonathan felt a weight settle on his shoulders. Not a burden, but a responsibility. These 2 lives had become intertwined with his in ways he was only beginning to understand. And deep down, he knew 6 months wouldn't be enough. Not for any of them. The next morning, Jonathan made a decision that would alter the course of not just Caroline and Emma's lives, but his own. He called his lawyer, Sarah, with specific instructions. Then he called Marcus and requested an emergency board meeting. His partner protested, but Jonathan was firm. Monday morning, 9 sharp. And Marcus? I'll need the conference room. I'm bringing guests. The board meeting was scheduled for 9, but Jonathan arrived at 7:30. He wanted to prepare the room himself, arranging the chairs, setting up the presentation, making sure everything was perfect. His palms were sweaty, his heart racing. He hadn't been this nervous since his first major property acquisition a decade ago. At 8:15, Sarah arrived with the paperwork he'd requested. She raised an eyebrow at his uncharacteristically rumpled appearance. "You're sure about this?" she asked, handing him the folder. Jonathan nodded. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." "The board won't like it," she warned. "Marcus is already rallying opposition. Let him try." Jonathan replied, suddenly calm. For the first time in his career, he was fighting for something beyond profit, and the clarity was exhilarating. Board members began filtering in at 8:45, men and women in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios and air of entitlement that Jonathan recognized because he'd worn it himself for so long. They greeted him with varying degrees of warmth, curiosity evident in their sideways glances. Marcus arrived last, jaw set in determination. "Where are these guests you mentioned?" he asked coldly. As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Diane entered, ushering in Caroline and Emma. Caroline wore a simple navy dress, another of Diane's thoughtful purchases, while Emma was in her school uniform, hair neatly braided. They looked out of place among the power suits and luxury watches, yet carried themselves with quiet dignity. Jonathan crossed the room to greet them, deliberately turning his back on the board's surprised murmurs. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "Are you ready?" Caroline nodded, though her hands were clasped tightly to stop their trembling. Emma simply looked around with wide eyes, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and the panoramic view of Boston. "Everyone," Jonathan announced, turning to face the board. "I'd like you to meet Caroline and Emma Taylor. They're why we're here today." For the next 20 minutes, Jonathan outlined his proposal. The company would establish a new division, Morgan Community Housing, dedicated to affordable units for families in transition. They would convert the Harrison Street property into mixed-income apartments rather than luxury condos. They would implement a rent-to-own program for qualified tenants, including single parents pursuing education or vocational training. "The profit margins will be lower," he acknowledged, addressing the skepticism evident on several faces. "But the social impact will be immeasurable, and frankly, we can afford it." Marcus cleared his throat. "This is a real estate development company, not a charity. Our responsibility is to our shareholders." "Our responsibility," Jonathan countered, "is to build something sustainable, something we can be proud of." He projected a graph on the screen, long-term projections showing how this initiative could actually enhance their reputation, qualify them for tax incentives, and position them advantageously for public contracts. "We're not giving anything away," he explained. "We're investing in Boston's future, in families like Caroline and Emma's." Caroline stepped forward then, her voice soft but steady. "6 weeks ago, I was dying in an abandoned house. My daughter was missing school to take care of me because we had nowhere else to go. Today, I'm enrolled to finish my nursing certification. Emma hasn't missed a day of school since. One person choosing compassion over profit changed our lives completely." The room fell silent. Emma, who had been quiet throughout, suddenly spoke up. "My mom's really smart. She just needed a chance." Several board members shifted uncomfortably, the abstractions of affordable housing and community investment suddenly given human faces. Jonathan let the moment stretch, understanding the power of discomfort. Finally, he distributed the folders Sarah had prepared, detailed business plans, financial projections, and implementation timelines. "I'm not asking for permission," he said quietly. "I'm informing you of a direction change. If necessary, I'll buy out any board members who can't support this vision." The vote was closer than he'd expected, 7-5 in favor, with 2 abstentions. Marcus stormed out immediately after, but several others lingered, asking thoughtful questions about implementation. One even offered to connect Caroline with the nursing program at Northeastern, where his wife taught. By late afternoon, the news had spread through the company. Some employees were confused, others inspired. Diane organized an impromptu celebration in Jonathan's office, complete with sparkling cider for Emma, who declared it the fanciest drink ever. As winter deepened into February, the Harrison Street property underwent transformation. Jonathan visited the site daily, often bringing Emma after school. She loved watching the construction crews, asking endless questions about support beams and electrical systems. The foreman, charmed by her curiosity, gave her a pink hard hat that she wore with immense pride. Caroline thrived in her nursing program, her natural aptitude finally given the chance to develop. Her health improved steadily, though cold weather still triggered coughing fits that reminded them all how close they'd come to tragedy. On weekends, she volunteered at a community clinic, her way of paying forward the help she'd received. The Dorchester apartment became home. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. Caroline planted herbs on the balcony. Jonathan found himself having dinner there several times a week, drawn to their company in ways he couldn't fully explain even to himself. One evening in March, after Emma had gone to bed, Caroline joined Jonathan on the balcony. Spring was teasing Boston with occasional warm days followed by stubborn cold snaps. They had taken to sharing these quiet moments, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. "Our 6 months are half gone," Caroline said, breaking their comfortable silence. Jonathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The deadline they'd agreed upon in December now felt like an approaching storm he had no power to divert. "Emma asked me yesterday if we'd have to move again when the time is up," Caroline continued. "She's finally feeling secure enough to worry about losing things." "You don't have to move," Jonathan said immediately. "That was never my intention." Caroline turned to face him fully. "What was your intention, Jonathan? We've never really talked about it. About why you keep coming back here, why you have dinner with us, why you're restructuring your entire company." The question hung between them in the chilly air. Jonathan had asked himself the same thing countless times over the past months. The answer had evolved from guilt to obligation to something far more complex. "I was alone," he finally said. "Surrounded by people, but completely alone. And then I met you and Emma, and suddenly I wasn't anymore." Caroline's expression softened. "We were alone too." They stood in silence, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. Jonathan thought about the first time he'd seen Emma, standing protectively in front of her mother in that abandoned house. How far they'd all come since then. "I don't want the 6 months to end," he admitted. "I don't want to go back to my life before." Caroline reached out, her hand finding his on the railing. "Then don't." In April, the first families moved into the renovated Harrison Street building, now renamed Taylor Commons. Jonathan's surprise tribute to Caroline and Emma. The grand opening made local news, with reporters particularly interested in the story behind the name. Jonathan redirected their questions, uncomfortable with publicity for what felt deeply personal. Caroline completed her certification with honors. The hospital where she'd been treated offered her a position in their respiratory care unit, a twist of fate that brought her journey full circle. Her first paycheck went toward a small but meaningful rent payment to Jonathan, who accepted it with the gravity it deserved. Emma blossomed in the stability of their new life. Her teachers reported dramatic improvements in her academics and social skills. She joined the science club, started a small container garden on the apartment balcony, and developed a close friendship with Diane's daughter, Maya. The shadows that had haunted her eyes gradually faded, replaced by the spark of ordinary childhood. As for Jonathan, he found himself transformed in ways he'd never anticipated. The company's new direction attracted idealistic young talent and favorable press. His relationship with Marcus remained strained, but other board members began to see the value in their community initiatives. Most significantly, Jonathan discovered purpose beyond acquisition and expansion. He was building legacy, not just wealth. On a warm June evening, exactly 6 months after their agreement, Jonathan arrived at the apartment with a gift-wrapped package. Emma greeted him with her customary hug, now accompanied by a stream of chatter about her science project and Maya's new puppy. Caroline was in the kitchen, preparing a celebration dinner for her first month of employment. "I have something for you both," Jonathan said after they'd eaten. He slid the package across the table. Emma looked to her mother for permission before tearing into the wrapping paper. Inside was a wooden picture frame containing a key and a document. Caroline recognized it immediately, a deed. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a rent-to-own agreement for this apartment," Jonathan explained. "Your payments go toward equity. In 15 years, it's yours completely." Emma looked between the adults, sensing the significance but not fully grasping it. "Does this mean we can stay forever?" "If you want to," Jonathan replied, his eyes on Caroline. She ran her fingers over the document. "This tangible promise of permanence. We can't accept this. It's too much. It's not charity," Jonathan insisted. "It's investment in Emma's future, in your career, in this community we're building together." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. You've already done so much. And you've given me so much more in return. Jonathan took a deep breath. 6 months ago, you asked what I wanted from you. I finally know the answer. I want to be part of your lives, not just your landlord or benefactor. I want to watch Emma grow up, to see you thrive in your career. I want a family. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. Emma, with a child's perfect timing, broke the tension. Like in my drawing? The three of us. Jonathan smiled at her. Exactly like that. If your mom agrees. Caroline looked between them. Her daughter, so resilient and hopeful, and this man who had walked into their lives at their lowest moment and somehow seen their worth. The journey from that abandoned house to this moment felt impossibly long, yet perfectly right. Yes, she said simply. The three of us. Months later, the Boston Business Journal ran a profile on Jonathan Morgan, the developer who'd upended his business model to focus on community housing. The journalist asked what had inspired such a dramatic change in direction. Jonathan's answer was simple. I walked into a house thinking I owned it, but found two people who taught me the difference between possession and belonging. Everything else followed from that. The article featured a photo of Jonathan at the Taylor Commons playground, helping Emma push a younger child on the swings while Caroline looked on, smiling. The caption noted that Morgan Community Housing had expanded to 3 more properties, with waiting lists growing daily. What the article couldn't capture was the private joy of their family dinners, the quiet conversations on the balcony after Emma went to bed, the profound contentment Jonathan felt watching Caroline study or Emma read. How the penthouse he'd once been so proud of now sat empty while he spent his evenings in a modest Dorchester apartment that finally felt like home. He had walked into that abandoned house thinking he would take something away. He left having been given something priceless, a second chance at being not just a better businessman, but a better man.